Have you ever made a pair of trousers just to have the waistband gaping at the back? Yeah, me too. This happens to me almost all the time if I make a pair of high-waisted trousers and the waistband was cut from a standard straight waistband. The solution? Make a curved waistband. In this tutorial, I will go through both how to draft a waistband, how to alter it to a curved waistband, and how to construct your curved waistband. Hi, my name is Matilda and welcome back to Miss Matti, the channel where I share all about sewing, knitting, mending, and generally how to live an awesome and sustainable life. I recently made the Landa pants by True Bias in this gorgeous spruce green color, and yet again I had to alter my waistband from a standard straight waistband to a curved one. And I will take you in this video through the whole process on how I did it. But if you want to see the whole process of me making these trousers, I will link to that video both in the cards as well as in the description box down below. As I mentioned earlier, there are generally two types of waistbands, a standard straight waistband or a curved waistband, also sometimes known as a shaped waistband. In this first part here, I will go through how to make a standard straight waistband from scratch. However, if you already have a waistband pattern piece and you just want to know how to alter it, just go ahead to this time here. To make your straight waistband, you will need to start by taking measurements from your trouser or skirt block pattern. If you have a seam allowance included in your pattern, remember to measure along the stitch line and not the edge of your pattern. Measure along the waistline on the front pattern piece. Center front to first dart leg and then second dart leg to side seam. Then continue to measure on the back pattern piece, side seam to first dart leg and then second dart leg to center back. Sometimes you might not work with a block pattern where there are darts at both the front and the back pattern piece, but rather pattern pieces where you might instead have tucks or a flat pattern piece where the shaping has already been incorporated into the pattern. If so, adjust accordingly. The most important thing to bear in mind is to only include the finished waistline measurements when making your waistband. Add the 4 measurements from the previous step together to create the length of your waistband. This pattern piece will create half of the waistband, as the pattern piece can be cut on the fold. But if you plan to add a button extension, you will need to lengthen the waistband pattern piece to its full length. More on that later. Draw a line as long as this measurement. Now it's time to decide how tall you would like your waistband to be. I would recommend you to pick a measurement between 2 to 6 cm, as this will create a waistband that sits nice against your waist. Draw a line from either end on the original line to mark the desired height of your waistband. Repeat at the other end and then complete the rectangle-shaped waistband by drawing the remaining line parallel to the original line. Now the basic shape of the waistband is created. The next step is optional, but if you want a double folded waistband, you will want to double the finished width before the next step. However, if you're planning to make a curved waistband, you should not double the finished width at this stage. And now it's time to add markings and so on to mark the location of your front dart or tuck if applicable, the side seam and the back dart. I also like to label the center front and the center back notches and the grain line, which runs vertically through the pattern. Then add seam allowances, unless you will proceed to make a curved waistband, because then you should skip this step. Then add any other pattern details you might like to add, such as if you plan to cut at the fold on the center front, or if you will cut 1 piece or 2 pieces. Then consider the closure you want to use. If you want to use a zipper that runs straight through the waistband, then your waistband pattern is now ready to use. But if you want to add a button extension, you will need to do the following. The button extension will only be added to one end of the waistband. Decide where you want the extension, at the center front, center back, or at the side seam. Then trace the pattern piece accordingly to create a full pattern piece. Make sure that you do not include any added seam allowance to the side where you will add a button extension until after you added the button extension. The length you will go for will depend on the size of your button. That being said, I think between 3 to 4 cm would work best for most button extensions. I have a 4 cm extension on the waistband that I'm constructing in this video. On my 1940s trousers, I have a 5 cm extension, and on the Tatiana trousers there is a 12 cm extension. But as you can see here, on the Tatiana trousers, I have both a button and a skirt hook closure, which requires a longer button extension. Then add seam allowance to the button extension if applicable, and your waistband pattern piece is complete. Tried on the mock-up that I made for the Landa pants. As you can see, there is excess fabric at the back of my waist as well as at the front of my waistband. For you, it might only be excess fabric at the back of the waist, but no matter where the excess fabric is located, a curved waistband will be able to help solving the gaping issue. Then I pinned in all the excess fabric in the waistband that will need to be removed to create a smooth waistband. If you have anyone to help you pin at the back, it will really help. But if not, you can do it yourself, just like I did here. Then I took off my trousers and marked on the waistband what I had taken in on both sides of the pins. Then I removed the pins and measured the distance and took notes of the measurements that I need to remove. As my straight waistband was double folded and included seam allowances, I started by removing the seam allowances and then cutting the waistband pattern piece in half. I will show you 2 different ways on how you can alter and create your curved waistband pattern piece. The first method is the one I have used the most often when creating curved waistbands, and it is also the method that I think is the most common. I will start by showing you this method and explain later on why I decided to do it slightly differently in the end. Mark center back, side seams and center front if applicable on the pattern if it's not marked already. Label these points A, B and C and draw a line if there isn't one already. Use the measurement that you took note of earlier and mark a point to the right from the line drawn. At the back, I need to remove 2.3 cm, and at each side front piece, I will need to remove 1.5 cm. Cut at each vertical line, leaving a little uncut at the bottom, and then pivot the piece until the slashed line overlaps the first point. Glue in place, and trace the pattern. Added notches at the top of the waistband, grain line arrow and seam allowance. However, at this point I didn't like the shape of my waistband as I wanted a smoother curve. As such, I decided to go for the second method instead. I think I needed to do this method because I had to remove quite a bit, especially at the back. Instead of taking in the excess at the center back, I decided to create 2 lines at each side in between the center back and the side seams. I divided my back measurement, which was 2.3 cm by 2, which equaled 1.65 cm, and then I marked this new measurement to the right side of the lines drawn. Then I cut the 2 new vertical lines and yet again left a little uncut at the bottom. And then I pivoted a piece until the slashed line overlapped the previously marked point. Then I glued the waistband in place, then I traced the pattern again. And as you can see, it will create a softer curved waistband than when I used the first option. Added notches at the top of the waistband, added the grain line arrows at the center back, and seam allowances. Now you are ready to cut out your curved waistband in fabric. cut out 2 of your waist pattern pieces in your main fabric, as well as 2 pieces in fusible interfacing. Off camera, I fused the interfacing to my waistband pieces, and then I pinned the top of the 2 waistband pieces together, right sides facing, making sure to match any notches. Stitch the top of your waistband pieces together. I trimmed away the inner waistband seam allowance and then clipped the seam allowances in the curves to create a smooth fold later on. Then I unfolded the waistband and pinned the seam allowances towards the inner waistband, and off camera I pressed the seam allowance in place before understitching the seam allowance on the inner waistband to create a neat and crisp fold. I understitched 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line. If you have an edge stitch foot, I would highly recommend you to use it. Then I folded my waistband wrong sides together and pressed to create a neat and crisp fold at the top of the waistband. Once that was done, I stay stitched at the lower edge of the inner waistband. Then I folded the seam allowance of the inner waistband upwards along the lower edge and pressed. I then base stitched my belt loops in place. So if you are using belt loops, make sure to also base stitch yours in place now. I have a full tutorial here on my channel on how to make and attach belt loops without any top stitching. So if you want to make these kinds of belt loops, I would highly recommend you to check that video out. I then pinned the edge of the outer waistband to the waistline, right sides together, making sure that the edges of the opening extend past the center front as much as your seam allowance is, which is in my case 1/2 inch. Then I stitched the waistband in place, and off camera I pressed the whole waistband up and away from the trousers. I also trimmed any excess seam allowance to reduce bulk. I then folded the seam of the waistband and pulled it down towards the waistband seam, right sides facing. Then make sure that the inner edge overlaps slightly, about 1/16 of an inch or like 1 to 2 millimeters, and then pin the seams at the center front and button extension. Stitch these right and left seams so that they will be level with the fly. And then cut off excess seam allowance and clip corners to reduce bulk. Then turn the waistband to the right side, making sure to pull out the center front corners. Then make sure that the lower edge on the inner waistband covers the seam about 1/16 of an inch or 1 to 2 millimeters, and pin the waistband in place. On the inside of the waistband, I like to finish in 2 different ways. Either you can do it like I did here on the lander pants, where I folded the fabric inward and then I stitched in a ditch on top, or you can do like I did on the Tatjana trousers here, which actually is my preferred method, where you finish the edge with bias binding, and instead of folding it inward, you just let it hang straight down. And I find that this method really helps to catch the fabric when I'm stitching in the ditch from the right side, which I find sometimes with this method doesn't happen, and that's really annoying. No matter which method you go for when making your waistband, it is now time to stitch in the ditch. If you decided to fold your inner edge inwards, it is especially important to make sure to catch the fabric from the inner edge of the waistband. Your waistband is now fully constructed, so you can now proceed to top stitch if you want, and or continue to attach belt loops if using. Once I had attached the belt loops, I created my final buttonhole at the waistband, and then I opened all the buttonholes and went on to attach buttons. But you can use other closures such as skirt hook closures, zippers, etc. if you prefer. And now my waistband is complete. If you found my tutorial helpful, do not forget to hit the like button. And also, if you made a cut waistband following my tutorial, do not forget to tag me in your makes on Instagram at Miss Matti. And if you like this video, you most likely will like these videos over here as well. And until next time, bye!